What's up, Rockstars, and welcome to my review of Kingdom Come Deliverance, the board game. This is on GameFound right now. It is linked down in the description below. Thank you to my channel sponsor Into the AM. As a company that believes hard work and a great product is a proper way to conduct business, I am delighted to have them as part of the channel. They have some of the coolest graphic t-shirts around and an absolute best fit and feel that has continually exceeded my expectations. With new shirts arriving all the time and other products like boxers, hats, and even a monthly shirt club, I wholeheartedly recommend them to you. Check out the link in my description of this video for an exclusive 10% off everything they sell. Thank you guys for watching. I'm happy to have you here. As you might know, this is a different style view than the normal review I have where I'm sitting in front of the board and I kind of explain things and stuff like that. That's because this is a very different type of game, and I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that in due time. We're going to go through kind of my list of mostly all the positives and then the negatives at the end, and then we'll kind of wrap things up and I'll summarize exactly who I think this game is for. Now, my first big positive here, and this is, as you can see behind me, I have a lot of games. I've given away a lot as like thank you gifts to previous donators and stuff like that. So I've played and been through a lot of games at this point. And one thing I'm always looking for when I'm looking at a game, when I'm looking to review a game or anything like that is what makes it stand out? What is so different about this one? What is unique? And the unique thing here, I very much believe, is the theme. Because if you didn't know, Kingdom Come Deliverance, the video game that this is based off of, first of all, was also crowdfunded, kind of a cool story, but is very much closer to a medieval simulator than it is like an RPG where you're going around and fighting, knights and bandits and stuff like that, while wearing armor with a sword or something. It's very much focused on realistic medieval times. So there's no magic system or anything like that you're going to see. There's no giant shoulder pads, people riding dragons. There's no dragons, none of that kind of stuff. This is very street level, low power level, nothing fantasy, medieval time period setting. And that, I feel, actually makes it quite unique. And so I really appreciate that. And you even see that in the artwork. So the artwork, as you can see, these are the map tiles that you're going to be going through. But there's a ton. This is just one scenario. As this builds up like a whole scenario, but there's a lot of places and things to go and see and do. But it's very unique in how it looks. And I actually really appreciate that. Even the items and the art that you get, again, very, very kind of plain looking. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the miniatures. So we'll circle back on this in a little bit. The other thing to note is that this is a mature storytelling, and that makes it, to me, more engaging than goblins pillaging the village, or, what the darkness encroaching on bad guys or something like that. Not that that's not interesting, but mature in both senses of the word. It is a more developed form of story, so the things that are taking place are very impactful. The best I could probably explain it to you is, if you've seen the Netflix series Daredevil, and you compare that to any movie in the MCU, well, one is grandiose and has, the world is at stake and, everything's about to, go down and, Thanos is killing people or whatever. Daredevil gripped me. I don't know if it did you. Just the interaction between the people, what was happening, how characters did things to one another or didn't do things to one another, just really, really always gripped me. So I always appreciate that street level style thing. It's a lot more emotional, a lot more impactful, a lot more raw, often more mature, and that's the other form of maturity here. So just as a note, this is a mature story. So there's people murdering women, there's innocent guys that are being burned alive, or maybe not so innocent, but either way, they're burning alive. There's people on stakes. There's even like some sexual remarks and stuff like that, some mild cursing, at least a little bit, just lewd comments, stuff like that. It is very much medieval world in every sense of the word there, and they're not shying away from any of the subjects that entails, whether it's religion, whether it's violence, whether it's misogyny, whether it's anything. All of that is present here. So just note that when you're going in, and if you're playing a family board game night, maybe look at the age range in your family first to decide if this is probably appropriate for you or not. But I personally really did enjoy this. It was a very engaging scenario, and I wasn't expecting that. Normally when we get prototypes, it's just like a little tiny snippet that's not super impactful, if that makes sense, because it's just a little snippet. But I mean, this one scenario, there's some stuff going down and it's very interesting, but it's all low stakes. You're just in this little village. There's just these people here and you're just dealing with the problems right there, not some grandiose thing. There's a little hints of stuff like that, but you're not leading armies. You're not killing orcs. You're not fighting dragons. You're doing none of that. And I actually welcomed the uniqueness of that theme and that mature storytelling that they were doing. Now, with that theme, let's talk about the minis. The minis are nice. They're really big. They're quite detailed. These are resin miniatures, so that yours will not look like this. However, you can see the quality there is actually quite nice when it comes to design, when it comes to the sculpt design. Now, this is actually one of the most dynamic miniatures they have. Most of them are just standing there. And at first I was like, well, that's kind of boring. And granted, it kind of is, but it also fits what you're doing. You're often talking to a guard that's just standing outside guarding. He's not like actively like attacking you or throwing a whip or has a flame sword or, anything like that. He's just a guard standing there, and it would look weird for him to be doing anything else. Or you're talking to the innkeeper, you're doing all this stuff. All of the characters you interact with are on the board, and it actually tells you to put them there. They have these rings, which was another cool thing I actually liked. It was a little bit of upkeep, but it wasn't that much, and the game itself is pretty light when it comes to upkeep, so it wasn't too bad there. But you put these like emotion rings kind of thing around that to say, hey, this has a white, that means you can interact with them, or they're orange or yellow or red, which means like they're like suspicious of you and stuff like that. So it was nice to kind of see every little bit you could kind of interact with in that sense for a person. And so I really actually enjoyed having them there, and it makes sense that they're just standing there. So it can be a little off-putting, when it comes to the art, because I mean, it's not the prettiest game, if that makes it like this is one of your characters. You can be them. You are playing just plain people. You're just a normal guy. And there's both some charm to that, some uniqueness, some draw to that, and some, maybe blondness, menace as well, as it is kind of just casual. But yeah, this kind of stuff I actually love. So I think that's great. Now, one thing I was impressed with is the amount of perks. This is the perk list I got. I don't know if that's all of them or not, but that's quite a few. And there are a ton here, from Well-Groomed to Avid Reader to Water of Life, Bundle Alchemist. For Esther, there's one that's just called Witcher that allows you to drink potions more often and not get drunk and stuff. Slim Fit. I mean, all of these you actually get by doing things. So you'll do something and then the app will tell you, oh, by the way, yeah, you go in and gain this or whatever. Now, while this is cool and it very much feels like you're you and you're getting that based off of your experience, they don't actually change the gameplay really at all. The gameplay is kind of what it is. We'll talk about that shortly. But it is kind of neat to get them, and it does make you better at certain things than others. So when you're sitting there deciding who goes where and does what, you're picking that based a lot on who the avid reader is, or who talks well to people, or who's kind of a rough and tumble person based off the action you need to do. Speaking of the app, let's go ahead and talk about this. If you didn't know, this is an app-driven game. The app is required, and it does quite a bit. Now, this enhances the story greatly, and that is because instead of me just reading it, and I mean, you hear how I speak, professional voice actors that sound great, a variety of voice actors, so people sound different with the music and the sound effects, stuff like that. I'm actually going to give you a little example here. So here I have the app open. It's just a web app right now. Forgive my phone, but I'm going to go and turn the volume up and just go through it a little bit, just so you can get a sense of that. So you should be able to hear that music a little bit.
Two dreadful years have passed since the Battle of Givor, the onset of the Hussite Wars. The Catholics and the Hussites have taken up arms.
Let's go and skip to where somebody's talking.
The Catholic, you're here, Wolf. Your task is simple.
So it tells you there's like a task to do.
Are you folks from around here?
You're talking to the person on the wagon, kind of like the start of Skyrim.
Sometimes places I've never even heard of. It breaks my heart sometimes. Children with no mothers, mothers looking for their children.
Okay, so I'm going to go and turn that down now. But you can get an idea of how that impacts the story, and that kind of makes it nicer. When I was done with the game and I want to go through other things, I was just going through the story, and again, I'll talk about that at the very end, actually. But it was just nice to go through the story and have people talk to me, and then have me, choose what to do in response, and then have them, change depending on what I'm doing and stuff like that. And then having, the females voiced by women and the men voiced by men, and, having the variety with the music, with the sound effects. If there's a burning building, you hear the crackling of the wood as you're going through it. Stuff like that's very, very neat. So I actually really did appreciate that. And it elevates the story quite a bit, makes it a lot more thematic. Additionally, it's nice to not flip through pages. I think we've all played enough narrative games at this point to know that it's like flip to, C105, and you flip to C105 and you read about a paragraph and it says, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to continue on? Okay, then go to F26-A. And so then you're flipping back over to F26 and you're going back and forth, to the point where you think, couldn't they have just laid this in order? I mean, it's because it's so divergent and they're wanting you to not see what comes next, right? So it's purposely obscuring that. So you're constantly flipping to be able just to read it. And then you're only reading it either in your head or somebody's reading out loud and probably not doing the voices and the sound effect and all the work that goes into that. So it was very nice to have that streamlined, and it speeds up the story and the pacing quite a bit as well, because you're not having to fumble around with a storybook or go between a storybook and an event or an event card that does something, and then that goes to the story, and then that goes to your personal mission, and then you're not doing any of that. It's very streamlined and it works out really well. Now, that also goes to the gameplay. Because it's so app-driven and because that's doing a lot of that, you're mostly just moving your person around and making decisions and doing things like that on the board. So the gameplay is actually quite streamlined. You move, if there's a guard, you roll, you see if you're spotted, you make a decision, you do that action. And that's pretty much what you do continually. That's the game. I just summarized kind of what you're doing. And so it's very streamlined, very easy to table. There's not a lot of components because, again, you don't have these big books laying around. You can play this on a smaller table, though, again, these do add up. And I mean, they get like 3, it's like 4x3, I think it was. So, I mean, and I don't know if the maps get any bigger than that, but either way, you can kind of explore and do that. But you also know ahead of time how big it is. So it kind of sections off, okay, I can go up twice and left twice. So you kind of know what space to put on the table. But it's easy to table. It's easy to play. You can just decide, let's play that, and then go play it. You don't have to worry about getting certain items or cards, stuff like that. There is a little bit of this. So again, I only played one scenario, but you will have to keep this with your characters and kind of what they do. It'd probably be a baggie or something like that. I don't know. Maybe they have a save state, but either way, it's not a lot to track. And that is a lot of it is in the app. And so it's, again, very casual to be able to play this. Now, that's where I start getting to the negatives. So I mentioned how the gameplay is very streamlined, but I'm using the word gameplay very loosely here because at the end of the day, you're moving, you're making a decision, and you're rolling skill checks. And that's the game. That's it. It is very much just like a tabletop RPG in every sense of the word. And I'll talk about that again at the very end, but you're going through the story and you're deciding what to do next, and then you're rolling to see if you can do it, and then you hear what the response is, and then you make another decision, and then you roll to see if you can do it, and then something else happens. Now, there are events that pop up and stuff like that in the app. You'll have to refresh. Eventually you run out of stamina, so you'll refresh and everything kind of goes, and that'll spawn events in the app, which is kind of like the DM bringing up something or changing thing or progressing the story as you're going around, and that's nice and all, but the gameplay itself isn't something I would even call gameplay. It's very much move, roll dice, read. Roof, mull dice, or listen, I guess. And that's very much it. The majority of any kind of strategy comes from you just discussing with other players who does what, when, and how. Now, that actually is the only reason to have this as a physical game. At the end of the day, this doesn't do dice. You do have to roll dice, but it could do dice, just like it could do movement. You'll actually see, I'll actually go ahead and skip a little bit, just so you can see how it's telling me how to set up the map. And then here is the map. Now, the white is images loading right now. Again, this is in beta. But you can see this is the app right here. Now, I can tell it I want to do something here, and I can tell it what I want to do. I want to inspect the door. I'm not going to spoil what happens inside that door. But the point is that you have to move around, and then if there are guards there, you do have to roll. It doesn't automate that for you. You would move and then say, oh, hey, that guard spotted me. I rolled. And then you would just click on the guard in there and say, he spotted me, is literally what you do. But it could be moved to the app. So the only reason to have anything physical, whether it's these minis or this or anything, is to actually just discuss it with other people, because the benefit that gives you is the multiplayer in person. If this was digital, you're not going to crowd around a screen. We don't do couch co-op anymore. And it would be very kind of odd to do that and then turn on the TV and then, it'd be like one of those old CD-based games where you could like select your answer with the remote. It'd be something almost like that, which is kind of odd, right? So that's why we have the physical part of it. Now, that's great, and I really appreciate that, because in the day, that's why I play board games. At the same time, this is very much edging towards that why make it a board game or why make it a video game scenario? What is the value of buying and storing and setting up all this physical stuff if you have this, right? That's a question I think only you and your group can answer, like for you, because it's different for everybody. For me, it was nice to be able to play this around a table with people. That's the benefit there. But that doesn't mean that's not an inherently enough of a draw to buy an entire game, if that makes sense, when it could just be a video game. But this is based off of a video game. You could just play the video game. So there's that too. Now, let's talk about the story a little bit. This is actually a positive for me, so I'm slipping in another positive, but it might be a negative for a lot of you as well. This is just me versus you perhaps in this, because I see this comment a lot, and I tend to actually disagree with it. But I ran through, and again, I'll mention this in a little bit, pretty much every scenario, any way you could go through this, right? Losing fights, winning fights, talking to people, not talking to people, doing all that stuff, right? And in doing that, it always ended the same way. So one of the objectives at the very end is to essentially leave here and try and get out with all the guards there or whatever, right? And there are really two main ways you can do that. And you could do one or the other, but either way, you're kind of getting through, right? Like this isn't a game where your decisions completely change the story. Instead, the story seems to be the story, and you're choosing your own path through that. I appreciate that much more, because I don't like the idea of not having a very solidly written story. I want a very solid story with specific arcs and bad guys and good guys, or they don't have to be specifically, oh, that's the bad guy. It can be gray. I don't necessarily care about that. But what I mean is I want the person that's telling the story to actually have a story, and then me just to find my way through that story and explore that story at my own will and what I'm doing, as opposed to saying, actually just write a sandbox and I'll make up my own story as I go along, and hopefully it's good, if that makes sense. So you can't really get really great, story pacings if you don't have control over the story. And so I actually appreciate that, but I know some people might not like that. The game will say stuff like, oh, they'll remember that, and they may not come up again in that scenario even. It could be something in the future. But from what I can tell, it's nothing as grandiose as like completely changing the story. And by comparison, in case, you're not used to what I normally cover, stuff like Sworn is closer to this, where you're going through the story and just kind of making decisions within that story. Whereas there's stuff like Aeon Trespass Odyssey, where your story can change greatly depending on your stuff. And you can miss out on whole swaths of content, or only do content only you will see because you made this decision instead of that decision, or this happened instead of that. So that's a very strong towards the other way versus one of these, which is closer to maybe like Sworn or something like that, if you're familiar with that, when it comes to there's a story and then you kind of find your way throughout it. If that makes sense. Now, I got two more points here. One point is that this had the same issue that I have actually seen in every single game like this, except a few. And that's when you have multiple people, other people can complete different parts of your quest. I see this in games potentially like Forsaken and stuff like that that's on Kickstarter right now. But also, I even saw it way back when I played like the Fantasy Flight's Fallout, the board game, right? Where I would talk to a person like, hey, find my little brother Timmy. And then somebody else who never even spoke to Grandma Bertha over here found little Timmy and can bring her back. Like, how would he even know that you had to bring it to it doesn't make any sense. So different people can complete different parts. So for instance, in this one, at one point I'm talking to an orphan, but then somebody else can go and then meet the orphan in the area. And it's like, it doesn't enforce that, the person that talked to him have to. So it's like a stranger came up. Now I get that we're kind of a group and we're going through this together, but little Timmy doesn't necessarily know that. And that happens on a lot of these games where you place tokens down or multi-stage things. There's a few, like for instance, I think Harakiri is probably the most recent one that did this, where only you can complete your quest, or you could share it, but then you have to be in the same location as somebody. So you have to be at the same location and then be like, okay, hey, by the way, I'm completing this. Can you go complete it instead of me or alongside with me? And then you can do that. There's others that have you, like I think The Witcher did this, where you put in your little token to say, hey, this quest marker is for me because I'm the one that talked to Grandma Bertha about little Timmy or whatever. And so like that is the difference here. This doesn't really have that. You're just kind of going and kind of doing whatever. And so there was a little bit of immersion breaking there for me personally, and maybe it's a weird pet peeve of mine, but I do notice that every time it comes up, and it comes up very often in a whole lot of these types of games. Okay, my final point, my final kind of negative on here, and then I will talk about kind of a summary of how I feel and who I think this game is for. You don't really need this. So after I played it, kind of more prim and proper, I wanted to go through, and I do this in all of my reviews, by the way. I go and I read the other options. I go and try and see how much does this branch out, right? Even if it's just a quick look, because some games only have a little bit, some have a lot, but like I just did that with Nanolith, and I do that with a lot of these, where I'll go and read all the story options to see how broad it goes. What's the scope? How wide is this ship, right? And I did that not by going and playing another session. I sat right here, which is why I'm filming this here, because there's not a whole lot really to show, on my phone doing this. So here I have to do a skill check to open the door. And so I could roll some dice. Oh, I got a 3. Boom. And I can keep going. I sat here with some dice in the app and I was able to play the game. The only thing you kind of had to I faked it a little bit, was the refresh thing. I just kind of kept it in my head how much I was spending. But you would probably need this as well. And the cards and stuff like that too, if you really wanted to get super proper about it. Because they give you stuff like, hey, you have +3 to this or +3 to that. But that's only because they chose not to put that in the app to make it a board game. But you can very much, if you just want to get through the story and experience that, which is it's a very interesting story. Again, it's very well spoken and all that. You can get through all of that casually on your couch if you want, with just your phone and some dice. Or you could even fake that. Like I just put in some numbers there. You're like, oh, I passed that one, yay. Or just say you auto succeed everything. Or maybe you want your character to fail. If you want to be a little DM about it, you can go through pretty much the entire content of the game just in the app. So definitely not needed. I know that's noted sometimes on, do you need the app? Do you not? Well, you definitely need the app. You can't do it without the app. You kind of don't need the game part of it if you choose not to. If you really don't want to, you can read it like a book. So in the end, I recommend this game for anybody that is either deeply in love with the theme or wanting something unique like this, because it's very hard to come by to find a narrative. I don't really know of another narrative-driven board game set in realistic medieval times that is like this. I mean, it almost always has goblins and kobolds and dragons and, all sorts of other kind of magic and stuff like that. And this has none of that. So if you like that, not even low fantasy, but no fantasy, almost medieval sim-like experience in a narrative game, this is kind of your option. And it's a good one too. Additionally, if you like the idea, and this is actually the camp I'm kind of in, if you like the idea of a tabletop RPG, but you don't want to role play yourself, and you can't find or know or trust or pay a dungeon master or a game master to run a game for you and set all that up, the app does it. This is essentially a DM-less tabletop RPG experience. You're doing the same things where you're rolling skill checks and you're comparing it based off your abilities and your perks and your items and your situation against theirs. And it says, oh, you need a 4 to fight this guy and kill him. Otherwise, if you get at least a 2, then you've wounded him. Otherwise, nothing. So there's different options in there you can do, and you roll your dice and see what you did. It's kind of like playing D&D, but a lot more easy to do. You don't have to invite a whole bunch of people and set up everything and craft a player story beforehand and then make sure that the DM, is accommodating to that and all that other kind of stuff. Like it's all very streamlined, very premium too. So if you're looking for a premium tabletop RPG-like experience, this has components for everything you need physically. And then when it comes to the story, it's like having Matt Mercer here almost. It's not quite, but it's kind of like that, right? Very professional voice acting, a variety of different voices, reacting to the things that you do within the construct of what it allows you to do. So every choice you make, it reacts to. And it overall, just a very pleasant experience. There's, again, music, and you heard the wagon going. And like I said, you hear the crackling wood of a burning building when you're near or inside of that. And like all that kind of stuff is there. If you say, I tumble against the guy, you hear a little scuffle actually as you do that. I mean, it's very thematic in that sense and quite nice. However, if you're wanting a board game, this is not something I would recommend. It is very bare bones of a board game. You're literally just choosing where to move, what to do, and rolling dice to see if you could do any of that. That's it. That's the gameplay. I just summarized it all for you. There's, some dice manipulation, stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it is just a skill check, and that's all it is. You're not even choosing, like, I want to do this ability, that ability. It's very much here are your options to deal with this guard. You pick one of them. And it's not just you. Anybody can pick those options. We all have the same options there. You might just be better at it than others, so you might want to do that. But it's not really even locked off to you. There are some things like, oh, you need a key to open a door or something like that. But it's all story-based stuff. It's not really gameplay, if that makes sense. So there's not a lot of systems in here. This is all just stat tracking, is all this is just stats. It's not game mechanics there at all. So anyway, yeah, if you want a board game, probably avoid. If you want a narrative-driven RPG-like experience, especially if you want to play it with other people so you can't really do the video game side of things, this is a huge win for you guys. That group is going to love this. Board game that just want to play a nice board game, probably not so much. So that's my summary of the review. Guys, let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you have any comments. Of course, I'll be down in the comments as well, responding and talking to you guys about this. And there is a link down to the GameFound page in the description below, of course. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.